So today I will try to clarify some aspects of the double darshan that I had from the Divine Mother on 18th November 1973, and which I described to the best of my ability in my previous video. I imagine very well that for a number of you, some aspects of what I described of those two experiences were quite familiar, just as they were for myself, as I told you. And how can I now give some clarifications about those two events? Is because in the months and years that followed, I discovered a very important document, which is a mine of information about the kind of experiences that can be expected as one follows the process of the integral yoga, going through the major kinds of experiences that are required for the process of this integral, gradual transformation to happen as they must for the real result. To someday be completed. That document is called very simply the Letters on Yoga. And they are a collection of the huge amount of correspondence that Sri Aurobindo found himself forced to have with quite a few of the disciples from 1926, when the ashram as such was really started, and 1950. 1950 is the date when Sri Aurobindo deliberately left his body for good. As we say commonly, he allowed himself to die deliberately because it was the only way, which was urgent at that time, after already the immense danger that the two First World Wars had been for the earth and for humanity. As long as what the real secret action of Sri Aurobindo, much beyond the having disciples thing, ashram thing, that was a kind of side responsibility. But what he was really doing was putting down as quickly as was at all possible the consciousness force that he and the mother had discovered beyond the layers of reality that ordinary spirituality has explored and knows of. Beyond that is still higher domain that both of them separately discovered, and which they call the supramental, way above the various strata of mind consciousness. And for the new step, which was becoming urgently needed for the Earth and humanity in their evolutive process, that specific vibratory frequency of that level of consciousness had to be pulled down. Not only through all the other dimensions of reality into the Earth's atmosphere, but directly into Earth matter itself, because there was dormant that same supramental consciousness-Force, the seed of it, kind of, which needed the contact with its original source, directly brought down into matter to be activated on Earth. Giving in that way new, incredible new possibility to life on Earth and to matter itself, which is the main point these videos are about. So Sri Aurobindo, to finish doing that work, so centrally important to what Mother and himself had been born to do together for the Earth and separation. It was necessary to finish doing that work quickly enough to leave one's physical body. When one is in a physical body as it is now, it makes everything slower than if you do it from outside the physical realm. So it was agreed between Sri Aurobindo and the Mother in 1949. That Sri Aurobindo would be the one leaving his body for good in order to finish that work from behind the scenes, so to say. And the mother agreed to be the one who would stay in her physical body in order to be the physical body who would be the first to receive directly from blood the vibration of the supramental consciousness-Force, when it would actually be activated right here and in matter itself. Her body had the most endurance of the two. It had actually been somehow prepared for the task. So in 1956, hardly 6 years after he had left his body, Sri Aurobindo from the other dimensions managed to indeed bring down this supramental consciousness-Force, this truth consciousness. Came into contact indeed with terrestrial matter, and within it started activating the corresponding sleeping beauty, one could say, of the same truth consciousness, supramental consciousness-Force, which was waiting there and which became active. So this is one of those dates where you can put a before and an after. And most people have no idea that this happened at all. And even those who are disciples of Sri Aurobindo and Mother, and so know that this happened, don't usually measure to which point it started changing really everything. And particularly in that matter, terrestrial matter, physical matter, which until then had been the stumbling block for spirituality, and which was supposed not to be part of what could be divinized. So, to go back to that double darshan, received from the Divine Mother, even much later than 1956, when Mother's body itself, without my knowledge at that time, had been undergoing after 1956 all these incredible developments experiences totally new for the body and itself, which are recorded in what she called Mother's agenda. Agenda in that case, is it more the French word, which means simply diary. So it is a recording of what could be recorded, because a lot has been missed, of course, of this constant ongoing process. So at least that much has been recorded and then transcribed in the 13 volumes of Mother's agenda. So at that time, I had no knowledge. Nobody yet had any knowledge of that. That's it. Or practically nothing. And at that time, even about the supramental, what it was supposed to be exactly, etc. The little I knew didn't help me much to understand that first Darshan. In the letters on yoga, I found at least the explanation of what I felt like my skull opening into halves. This is actually quite common. It's not really happening in the actual physical body, although it feels like it is, but it is happening. All these things relative to our chakras, to our energy centers, which are behind the spinal cord, the column vertebral, the spine. And in that case, above the skull is the place when it opens fully. So this is a common occurrence. And it is not always felt in that way, but for each of the major type of experiences needed during the integral yoga, there is a typical diversity, variations upon a basic characteristic. Of that type of experience. So, from the descriptions of this type of experience, this is indeed what had happened to me on that day. And you remember I was mentioning the fact that later on, it was the heart chakra which was concerned, and where the divine force expressed itself for me. And this was important in my own case because it is at that level of the being, actually behind, so to say, in the inner space behind the heart chakra. That is a seat of what Sri Aurobindo and the Mother call our psychic being. Psychic is from the Greek word psyche, which means the soul. So psychic being means literally, in the vocabulary they adopted, it is the being of the soul. The soul, to start with, is just a spark from the divine sun, one could say. And the unique spark with unique becoming but every time it incarnates, that spark will grow, because it will become stronger by finding ways, more and more, lifetime after lifetime, to influence the life and decisions, etc., of the outer being, the only one usually we are conscious of as individual human beings. But gradually it directs our being, our mind, the life energy, the vital energy in us, the emotional, our emotions. And not much the body, towards what the divine is in its true, complete way of being. So because of my previous so intense questioning to the divine, revolt in a way, although I kept my faith somehow, and I got the answer. So that book, The Life Divine, and all that followed. But still, my mind during that time had hardened itself. I didn't have any more the spontaneous, totally trustful, little soul of my childhood. And with all the difficulties of daily life and of coming to Auroville, you have seen how my mind had become again the main tool for me in life, the main thing I trusted, actually. And so that was my condition still, even if in me the need to see the mother had been awakened and intensified in the way I have described in the previous video. Still, my mind was very strong. And the only way that you see, actually, later on when I thought of it, if I had had a regular darshan with mother for my birthday, it is extremely likely that my mind would have taken over. And I would have seen sitting there in front of me only that extremely old lady. Mother was 95 by then. Her body was very much bent. And it is very likely that this is all my mind would have allowed me to see of her being. So the only way to reach me was again to take away my mind in some definitive and drastic way. So this happened first by opening what is beyond the mind, and kind of annulling the mind. You have seen how the mind only managed to come back with a small, little stupid thing to say. But that by that time, all the rest of my being was totally immersed, literally, in what was then told to me was what is in India they call the Divine Mother. And in its essence, that reality, that eternal being which acts as the all-embracing presence, carrying everything there is. In its development into becoming again the divine it truly is. So it was only through going down this way and not directly that the divine could reach again that soul in my psychic being, the being of my soul, and speak to it directly. And make my whole being, if not my mind, experience what in India they call in its essence Sat Chit Ananda. In one word, Sat Chit Ananda. And Sat means what is. Isness itself. What is real. What truly exists. Sat. Chit is goes with it. This true reality happens to be total consciousness. And total consciousness means total power. And then the third ingredient, one could say, in this Satchitananda is Ananda. The equivalent in English would be bliss. But that word is so commonly used now for almost anything. It's better to keep the word Ananda. So what I experienced which struck me so much was that Ananda My being was plunged in, bathed in. And then it is absolutely normal. Even in previous experience, which in my childhood I knew, I had no idea it was actually a spiritual experience. But there is no sense of passing time. Time doesn't exist at all in the way we experience it as human beings here. So it was only normal that the sense of time had vanished during at least the first Darshan on that day. And that so surprising ending of the experience by the ocean of light kind of receding all the way down to the ground level, and even inside the ground. When I discovered later on what Aurobindo in 1956 had made finally happen for the earth and in matter itself, it made perfect sense. Now, in the second Darshan, I have seen later on in the every month in the ashram there is this ashram bulletin, and so in the next issue of the bulletin there were actual photos taken of mother's body on that bed in that hall on that same morning when I came. When I saw those pictures, that was unbelievable for me. I almost cried with astonishment. But not at all. It was not at all like that. And still probably that's what most everybody saw. But again, that capacity of subtle vision seems to have been opened already from before. And then, especially just a bit before I came to see the body of the mother, the physical Darshan, which mother made possible, even though according to linear time, I should not have had the time to be ready before the birth came. Still I was. And what I saw slightly above the bed I believe, from what I have read in Mother's agenda since then, and I have read it thoroughly. The consciousness of the cells in mother's body had become so developed. So at the end of the agenda, she's explaining that it could very well be that actually this body will not go on, that it will seem to die. And that the decision for that will be left to the cells themselves. Because just like Schrödinger, she hadn't come to win that victory and that transformation of the body just for herself. What had been started in her body through the consciousness of her cells, developing in such a way, spiritually, had to be somehow transmitted to others. That was the main purpose. And so the choice would be left to the cells themselves, whether for the world at large, the result would be better by those cells remaining together as that one body, which was mother's body, going on until total transformation, or to leave that shape of the mother's body in order to disperse, and with their consciousness already so different, to act as seeds penetrating other bodies and communicating to them with an invisible contagion. The spiritual capacities that they have developed. So, and it could very well be, as I will explain someday, that the cells of mother's body manage to do both, to remain not in a visible way yet. The new body that of herself that she had already seen several times before 73. And some of the substance of her body, some of this huge population of cells constituting her body, had been there to disperse and exercise this contagious effect on whatever other bodies happen to come and to be open to that kind of contagion. So I hope this gives a new light, literally, to the basic description I gave last time of what those two tremendous darshans have been. At that time, I had no idea. And it took still several years for this contagious effect to grow in my body until something of it started expressing itself in a way that I became aware of. And that was already 2 years before I had had a very momentous surprise in having in 1976. I had my first direct contact with myself, their consciousness, their life. But at that time, it was not specially spiritualized yet at all. As you will see when I will tell that story. But 2 years later, in 1978, some of those cells started turning towards the divine and dedicating their life to the divine, exactly as I was. So I had myself a lot of difficulty to accept those facts. And it took the mother a lot of confirmation. And also to make me accept that. Because by that time, what I had come to know about the way it had been for mothers, but it was no fun. It can very often be quite painful. And I knew my body didn't have at all the endurance that the mother's body had. And I actually refused at first to have anything to do with what was starting to happen in my body. And I was asking the divine to stop that immediately. It was not for me. So, voilà. So the divine had to give me a certain reassurance, which I communicate. I am just now giving some hints of how it went on. But you see, I am not an exceptional being. And I was certainly not perfect, far from it, as you will come to know as well, during all the intervening years. And still, that has happened secretly. At first, in total secret for 20 years. And again, it had to be the divine organizing a certain situation when I had, for the first time, to tell somebody else about it. So at every step of my life afterwards, each new development, which is consciousness of the self, has done, didn't happen by my own will at all. So it seems that people who can simply open themselves to the possibility can very well receive the same completion. Now it is there in the atmosphere of the earth. One doesn't even have to come to all of it specially. So but not only most people on earth have simply no idea of what Schrödinger have done and why, and with what effect. But even people who are their disciples, who have read a lot, etc., and who think they have studied enough what concerns these possibilities for the body, I have found that in many cases, they have misconceptions in their heads, erroneous beliefs. Many people think that the contact with the cells or any development, significant development in the consciousness of the cells can happen only at the very end of the full process. It is not true at all. And the cases, there are all the cases, I'm not claiming any exclusivity either. In the ashram itself, there have been other cases before me when it started happening to me, and it was such a puzzling and alarming to a great extent phenomenon. I tell you, I did quite a research to find out who else. Because on top of it, you see, it's quite alarming to feel you are the only one. How could that be? So you are quite eagerly looking for other cases like you see? Or are you going crazy? Or are you, I mean, so another misconception is that you have to be it's linked with the perfection idea, etc. Only at the last stage of the full process of transformation comes a stage when parts of the being become at last ready to be supramentalized, the first transformation has to happen first, which is the transformation thanks to the psychic, to the being of our soul, which is really starting to guide the whole being as much as possible and more on its way towards the divine. And this communicates to the outer parts also of our being, the same feelings, the same love for the divine, the same irresistible attraction, trust, love for the divine, as the psychic being itself, which feels that it is the child of the divine, and who is always aware of being divine and eternal, an eternal part of the divine. So this is the psychicization, the first stage of the transforming influences by the various energies that have to operate that transformation of all the parts of our. But more or less together with the psychic being, which is from within. It is a transformation from within, which opens every part of the being to the influence from the Divine Mother herself in her cosmic aspect, and to the vastness, to the power, to the, other qualities, other characteristics of what the divine is are added, which are more in the range of the normal spiritual life, as it was known already before. And only later, and only in the parts of our being where already those two influences, the influence which is the psychicization from the psychic being from within, and the influence from above to make us grow. Towards our full stature as the embodied divine. The psychic being is more the attitude of the child, which gives the openness for everything else to happen as it should, thanks to the action from above, which without the psychic being, when it is done out of spiritual ego, or you see, whatever personal spiritual ambition or what, it is extremely risky. And it cannot anyway be done completely at all. For the full transformation, that must include the last stage directly from the supramental consciousness-Force itself, acting on it. And that is a supramentalization. So that simply cannot happen. That has been said quite clearly again and again by Shogun. You can reach some levels of spiritual power and whatever, you see, by your own personal willpower and inner capacity. But for the full transformation up to the supramental stage, it has to reach, to be stabilized and something that includes the transformation of the physical body too. This simply cannot be done without the action of the psychic being as the basis. Plus, so there are psychicization, spiritualization, and supramentalization. This is what Schrödinger and Mother call the triple transformation. They are the three stages. The first two can happen more or less together. And only the parts of us where already the two first stages have been accomplished can start undergoing the last stage, which is the supramental. Okay. So as you can see, this is not in one day at all that it can be done. Schrödinger and the Mother were speaking of maybe 300 years or something, because when the whole body thing is the new dimension. So this is what I will tell more stories about, for those of you who are interested to know more. It's so wonderfully simple and beautiful and moving. But for today, let us come back to where we stopped in the last video. And my psychic being precisely, although it was called upon, and at that occasion, given again strength. It had to come fully and permanently forward. And that will be the third part of my discovering the Mother. That will be for the next video. I hope the clarifications of today will be enough that when we can leave behind temporarily these double Darshan momentous happenings and keep moving along with what happened then in my life. A few years later, another major experience, this time directly with the psychic being. All this is so wonderful to share. That this new reality is unfolding in our lives. Is the most wonderful fact. That my whole being rejoices. To be living and to be able to simply tell the people about it, so that if they are interested, they can simply burn themselves. In total gratitude to share in their body. started it all. Mm. Oh.